and welcome back to this OutreachOne training video. Today we're going to be helping the McRib family with their request for rent assistance. So let's go ahead and open up their household. And here's their household page. Now, because we've been working with them so much recently, there's probably not much to update here. So let's go ahead and go to the View Add Transactions. And as you remember, we opened up the Homeless Prevention Program form for them already. And we've already done an emergency food pantry for the household. But today we're going to be working with the HPP. And here is their intake page. And you remember we filled in information here about how Wendy was in an accident and has been out of work for 6 weeks, starting back in December. Let's take a look up here at the dashboard, and you can see the date that the application was opened. Current case status is open and pending. The follow-up date for action is 2/27. And the follow-up action that needs to happen to get it to the next step is need to contact the landlord. However, today we're going to be entering the information on the rent worksheet. Now you remember these are all tabbed up here at the top of the page, and we're going to go right to the rent worksheet. And underneath the dashboard, which stays open all the time for your reference, you can see on the rent worksheet there are just a few questions really, and the first box up here asks about the rent application. The notice of decision was provided for this crisis from the City of Portsmouth, so we'd check that. They are in the eviction process, so we'll check that as well. It asks, is this assistance for first month's rent? And this is not, so we leave that unchecked. Down here it asks for the actual eviction documents that have been served thus far. The McRibs are being evicted due to non-payment of rent. And while we're on the subject of eviction based on non-payment of rent, it probably would be best if we had just a brief explanation of the eviction process. There is a lot of confusion about eviction, and this is meant only to be an overview of non-payment of rent. The New Hampshire General Court provides rights, protections for landlords and tenants, provides an eviction process for 4 basic causes: the violation of the lease agreement, damage to property or disturbance of other tenants, non-payment of rent, and of course eviction for other causes. Far and away, the most cases that we deal with are about non-payment of rent. There are 4 steps to go from the eviction to ejection. The first 2 steps are initiated by the landlord after the rent is due and is unpaid. The demand for rent documents that the rent is due and is currently unpaid. The notice to quit is a document which says there was a demand for the rent and it is still unpaid, and therefore you must vacate the premises within 7 days. After the 7 days, and assuming that the rent is still unpaid, the landlord is then free to approach the local district court. After paying a filing fee, the clerk of courts will review the demand for rent and notice to quit to make sure that due process has been served. If indeed everything looks appropriate, then the court will take the next steps to have the sheriff serve a landlord and tenant writ. It is important to understand, and often misunderstood, that a landlord cannot eject a tenant from the property. Only a court-appointed official can do so. The landlord and tenant writ is a notice from the court saying that it appears that the landlord has satisfied all of the necessary steps to proceed with an eviction. It provides the tenant an opportunity to challenge this by filing an appearance and having a hearing before the judge. Filing an appearance must be done no later than the date of return that is listed on the landlord and tenant writ. Often we advise the tenant that they file their return on or just before the date of return in order to give them the maximum amount of time to make arrangements to either pay the rent or make other arrangements to move somewhere else prior to the scheduled hearing. At the hearing, assuming the judge rules in favor of the landlord, the final step of the process is the issuance of the writ of possession. This is the notice to the client or the tenant that they are required to vacate the property. This is usually within 2 or 3 days of the hearing and requires them to make arrangements to move their belongings and to vacate the property. The sheriff is present and the landlord is required to change the locks. And a restraining order is posted on the door, disallowing the tenant to return without permission from the landlord. So now let us return to the McRib household and let's review the rent worksheet page. As you remember, we looked already here at the documents that had already been served, and they've already received a demand for rent and a notice to quit. They've not been served with a landlord-tenant writ or writ of possession, obviously. So the next step would be to make a full accounting of the rent arrearage and the assistance that is available to address the arrearage. We do that by opening up this spreadsheet, and it's right here where this icon is. You click on that and it opens up an Excel spreadsheet, and you can see it has a place for the rent arrearage dates from and to and so forth, the amount owed, any late fees, legal fees, etc. And I'm going to fill in this information and we will then take a look at it. Okay, and here we are. We've entered the information. You'll remember from the our intake and from the documentation on the demand for rent notice to quit that the 2 months that are owed are January and February, and we've entered that $1,000 each month. It automatically will calculate the total and the total owed here. Now down here in the summary of assistance, we know from the notice of decision from the city of Portsmouth that they're going to provide $1,000, and then all things being equal and we get the landlord to agree to the terms, we will also provide assistance. Now we take a look at the demand for rent and notice to quit, and you fill in this box here which says total amount needed to avert this crisis, and that's $2,000. This coincides with what we're seeing here, and the city of Portsmouth has said that they would assist with the month of February. And when you get those X's like that, it just means that the number is a little too large for that cell, and you can just ease it over a little bit and you'll see the total number. And if we do $1,000, then you can see there's a zero balance here. Total amount needed to avert the crisis, 2,000. Total assistance available to avert this crisis is also 2,000. Okay. Once we've completed that step, the next thing would be let's make a copy of this rent verification report. Click on that button and you can see it'll pull up this nice report, shows the full accounting of the rent arrearage, the summary of assistance, the balances, etc., etc. It's got statements in here that ultimately the landlord will have to agree to and sign and return to us. But make a copy of this for yourself, and then the next step would be to call the landlord. And when you do that, it's always a good idea to just open up the vendor worksheet, because that's where the landlord's information is going to go. And you make a phone call, have your rent verification sheet in front of you, and then the next step is to start asking questions. Prior to the phone call, you might just look on your demand for rent and notice to quit and be able to pull some information about the landlord. We did this and we filled in certain information between what we could get from the forms and information that the client had about the landlord. We were able to put in basic information about the landlord even before we made phone calls. And I've entered the information, the landlord's name, Angus Berger, and his phone number and fax number. And he lives in Brighton, Mass, so he doesn't live near where the property is. He has a property manager, Donald McCheese, and Donald has a cell phone, and we put that there. He's delegated to be able to make decisions for the landlord about evictions and so forth, so we can speak directly to him. Once you have the landlord or the landlord's agent on the phone, the first thing that you want to talk about after introducing yourself is to verify the arrearage, to make sure that it is still accurate. And the second is that you want to find out if the landlord will accept our payment and any other payment that's being made, and in this case it would be from the city of Portsmouth. The two payments in lieu of pursuing eviction for at least 30 days from the date of the agreement. And if they will do that, then you will make a note of that down here in other vendor arrangements. If they are willing to do that, then you also then have to cover some of these questions about the W-9. Some landlords that we do a lot of business with, we have that information on file. If we don't have it on file, then they have to submit to us a W-9 form along with the rent verification sheet, which is back here. You'll remember this rent verification report has to be sent to them, and they have to sign it and date it and return it to us along with a signed W-9. Okay, once that's done, we can close this. And it's important to go back to the vendor worksheet and make note of the phone call. So on 2/24/13, Donald McCheese, the landlord's agent, agreed to accept our payment of $1,000 towards rent arrears in conjunction with the payment by the City of Portsmouth in lieu of eviction for a period of no less than 30 days. And then I'd put my initials. And now that we've gotten this agreement, we can update the funding. So we'll go back to the funding tab up here. And you remember we only estimated $1, but now we want to make that 1,000 because we know that's what the payment is. And the actual amount is going to be 1,000. And then press allocate. And it does say that it is allocated now. Okay, and that updates the grant balances and so forth. And so we're all set with this. The next thing would be to change follow-up action. Will be on 2/24 contacted landlord and made agreement, and my initials. Now our status is open and pending here. We've allocated this amount of funding, but that means it's still just pending. Because the status is open and pending, this has not actually been charged to this client's account yet. But if we say granted, then it is. That money is now taken out of the grant for that purpose. And to finalize the granting process, the last step is to enter a closed date for the case. You just click on the calendar, and in this case we put in the 25th of February. Now, to prepare the case for payment from the fiscal department, we go to the voucher payment tab, and we used to use voucher numbers. We don't any longer. But in this case, the center that was providing assistance was out of the Portsmouth office. The date, starting date of the period funds have been granted. We were paying, you remember, for January, the month of January, so it was 1/1/2013 and 2/1/31/2013. And down here where it says purpose of grant, what is a specific purpose of the grant? Well, we do assistance for various different things. The top one is our choice here was to provide rent assistance in order to prevent eviction. And the period funds have been granted, what is the end date, was 31 and 2013. And that is all the information we need for that. And then we can generate the confirmation of grant report, which helps whoever is putting the purchase order together and getting it ready for payment. It provides all the information that we need. Tells what grant was used, who the household is, their household number, the description of the funds granted, and also the arrangements made with the vendor. This concludes our rent assistance worksheet. In our next video, we'll be covering how to do the utility assistance worksheet. Until then, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you for watching.